Welcome to preparing for your M3 huddle. M3 huddle dates are quickly approaching and will be a valuable space for you and your team to have some much needed time together to connect and reflect around your programs. We're going to take the next few minutes to review what you need to know to prepare to make the most of the day. And if you've never attended or prepared for M3 before, this will be very helpful for you. If you have, it might still be a good reminder. The information I share today will be also available on the Activator Resources page on our website, so feel free to look there for any of the links that I mention. As the quality lead, if you haven't already, you will receive an email prior to your huddle that contains the information that I'm going to be talking about today. A couple of things to know: it'll just have the logistics of the huddle, and please do share that with your staff. Some tips that are going to help prepare you and your data for the day, which again, you'll hear some of that in this video. And then I will also send out a separate meeting invite. Please forward that invite to your colleagues that'll be attending. I know not all of them use their calendars or use their email in that way for work. It is helpful for me though to have that kind of as my gauge for what our numbers are looking like. It also includes the logistics and the video links that will be talked about today. But ultimately, all that information is in the email that you have, and if you can make sure that they get it, that will be particularly helpful. I do know that when you registered your team for the huddle, you did let me know how many you expect to have attending. But if that number has changed, either decreased or increased by 2 staff, please let me know. And as a reminder, it is best to have at least 2 people attend. Programs have participated with 1 individual in the past, but by and large, they've always wished that they had another person there to talk through the data with. To prepare your team, make sure that they have it on their calendars. Again, even if they don't use like Outlook calendars or Google calendars, but make sure that they know of the day. And please make sure that they plan ahead to have time to park and settle in and be prepared at the start time. The sooner that we start on time, the more likely we are to stay on track to be ending on time. We will provide some light morning beverages, typically an assortment of teas and hot water options. Coffee is really dependent on if we have a coffee maker available at that location, timing, or any number of factors. So if you know coffee is going to make or break your day, you may want to bring it with you, and if we happen to have some, you can freshen it up throughout the day. We will also be providing lunch. When I order lunch, I do try to take into account having some vegetarian options and avoiding pork. Specific dietary needs beyond that may want to bring something as a backup. Depending on where we order from, managing gluten-free or vegan options can be tricky, as hard as we try. Also, just feel free to dress comfortably. Think of this as a working retreat. The email will also include a link to the welcome video from Ignite. This is for all staff who have not attended a huddle or maybe haven't for a long time. It's important as it sets up the foundation and culture around how we think of data and how the day is structured intentionally to support youth workers. We used to spend a good part of the morning of the huddle digging into these pieces and creating understanding with everyone in the room. But we know that having staff watch it ahead of time means that returning staff don't have to sit through it all again. We do touch base on those pieces just very quickly to set the tone, but to really understand them and to kind of, again, build that cultural piece about data, it is important to have people familiar with it ahead of time. The other video you may have in your email if you are doing an online huddle is the Miro video. That video is important for any staff who hasn't used Miro before. Again, we'll share some navigation reminders the day of the huddle. As the technology has changed, there are some minor differences, but knowing that staff can access the Miro board and do some basic navigation on the site ahead of time will save you and them frustrations the day of the huddle. This document may look familiar. If you are in charge of a team of people, it may be helpful for you to have this thought through before the M3 huddle day. We are going to have about 5 minutes during the earlier part of the session where you can share with your team what data that you brought and how it fits into each of these categories. The email you received will have some tips and reminders around those 4 areas of data and some suggestions on what you might be able to do prior to or the day of the huddle if you don't have areas of any data in those areas. But things to remember is that if you don't have data in all 4 quadrants, that is fine. Again, we'll have prompts, we'll have some suggested time, and that discussion that you'll have with your team is going to be really helpful. Now, if this document is enough and you are ready to start pulling your data to get ready for the huddle, that's great. If you have any questions, let me know. But if you still have questions and aren't sure about how to prepare your data, keep watching and we're going to touch on each of those 4 areas. So attendance and participation data, as a reminder, is data that reflects who's attending and how often that they're attending. So if you use the Sprocket CitySpan data system, on our Activator Resources page, there is a link on how to run participation reports. And it's a cheat sheet that you can pull that kind of walks you through the steps on how to run attendance reports or participant counts and demographics. If you have a different system, I can't help you figure out how to run those, but I can give you some ideas to think about as you're preparing to think about attendance and participation data. Are you going to run it across the whole program, or is it aggregate across the program sites? What data span do you want to run? Are you looking at the fall session? Are you comparing it to last fall session? Are you thinking about a specific time frame on the calendar year? Do you want to run the numbers of days attended? What breakdown would make sense for your program? Thinking about the days of the week, or how many people a week, or per event. Whatever is going to be helpful for you to know. The other thing to consider is, does your program have some goals? Maybe you've written them in grant reports and things like that about how often, what percentage of attendance young people will have, what zip codes that you prioritize in your program, or ages, grades, race, ethnicity. So when you think about what your goals are, that's helpful to bring too, because context really matters when we're thinking about participation data. With quality practices data, we are talking about what happens at the point of service with young people, so staff and their interactions with young people. So if you're an activator, it is likely that you have a YPQA or SEL-PQA report to print off. On that Activator Resources page, there is another cheat sheet on how to run your PQA reports in Scores Reporter. There is also a bunch of video links that can walk you through that as well if needed, but it really, if you follow those instructions, isn't all that hard. Now, I know that everybody uses YPQA or SEL-PQA. You might have a different tool that you're using that measures quality practices, and so again, making sure that you have those reports available. If you don't have any PQA data this year or other quality practices type of data, there's a couple of things that you can do in a quick staff meeting, even before you come to the huddle, that will help really give you more space to have conversation at the huddle. Again, if you don't have these things done beforehand, you can do them at the huddle as well. You're just going to want to probably do a little bit more digging than we'll have time for during that day. But you will notice on the Activator Resources page that there is a SEL-PQA note sheet. There's also one for YPQA that looks like this document on the left, where it has the different kind of items that are listed in the tool. So having a reflective conversation with your staff, this one is shown here with these infographics. There are 4 of them. So if you have someone on your team that actually is familiar with the tool, even if not a lot, but is somewhat familiar, you could print off that number 2 Team PQA reflection sheet and just walk through some of those items and have a conversation. How do we feel like we're doing on this? Are we like doing amazing? Or maybe that there's some things that, you know, we're aware of, but it's not consistent. Or maybe it's something that we do need to work on or think about more. That might be a way you use this sheet. Another thing you could do is just kind of go through it with staff, or even on your own in preparation of the day, and thinking about your program. If you haven't been using it, what items are priorities for you right now? We know that all of these practices are high quality practices, but depending on the context of your program, your familiarity with the tool, you may focus on just some key ones to get started with. So what's most important to your program right now? Thinking about your goals. Now, the other piece, if you don't have anybody who's familiar with it, is with this infographic that shows a deck of cards. I have some of those, and if you want them, we can connect you with them. But again, you could just be using some of the key items and just using your gut. What do you know about it? Those tools are available also on the page, so if you have the time and wanted to look into it more, you can. But the goal is not to put a bunch of additional work on you prior to the huddle, but just maybe taking a few minutes to go through and familiarize yourselves with the document on the left, whether it's the SEL PQA note sheets or the YPQA note sheets, so that when we have some area for you to have some conversation around it, that you'll have some familiarity with that sheet. The other tool that is available on the Ignite website is their Believe and Build inventory, and I'll have some copies of that that has a self-reflection sheet that you can use as well for your program. When it comes to program experiences and youth outcomes, this is really based on your program and what the goals of your programs are. So youth experiences, that might be surveys that you've done, focus groups where you've actually gotten feedback or information from young people about how they are experiencing the data. So you can tell in that little image, it's kind of a reminder. What are they feeling or what are they thinking about the program? The youth outcomes data is about information that can demonstrate impact. Why does your program exist? What kind of impacts does it want to have for young people? And so if you have data in those, bring it. That's wonderful. If you don't, this will be a time to start thinking about and really having a great conversation with your team about what are the outcomes that we want for young people. So to do that, some of the things you might want to think about bringing if you do not have data is maybe your results from last year. So maybe you have a survey, you did it last year, you for whatever reason weren't able to this year. You could bring the results of that and use it not because you're going to use last year's data to inform, but to think about like how does this year from the staff perspective compared to last year. And so again, we don't necessarily know exactly if we're not hearing from young people, but using our staff instinct and perception on those things. Now, it could be that you haven't administered one for a long time, but you're new to your site and you know that there's some old surveys around. You could bring those just again to be a starting point to think about what has been asked in the past. You don't need to have that, but it could be helpful. The other thing to think about are, do you have logic models, either current or old ones, or again, program goals around experience or outcomes that you've written about in your grant proposals or to your board or any other materials that may help inform your conversation this year for planning for next year. So if you have those things, bring them because that'll be really helpful for the conversation. Again, if you don't have anything, when we get to this time, we have some discussion pieces for you to get you started. So then you can start thinking about, is this something that I want to have in the future and what could it look like and what are my steps to get there? So that is a lot of information, and I know, especially if this is really new to your organization, that it is a lot. So if you feel like you want to schedule a time to talk about it, you can always email me, or on the screen is my Calendly link, which will bring you right to my calendar so you can choose a time to schedule that works for both of our calendars, and it will send a Zoom link automatically in the meeting invite. And so please feel free to reach out with any questions that you might have. I look forward to seeing you and your team at the huddle and be making some meaning with data.